Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that nobody is in charge. No president, no police, no tax department, no army. And if some guy walks into your neighborhood wearing a ridiculous crown and announces, "I am your king," you don't kneel, you laugh, then you walk away. For most of human history, that would have made perfect sense. Humans spent hundreds of thousands of years living in relatively small communities without kings, palaces, or hereditary rulers. People hunted, they gathered, they argued, they cooperated, they raised children, they competed for status. But nobody got to permanently declare, "I am above everyone else." Then something changed. Humans began settling down. Food could be stored. Populations grew. Property accumulated. Wars became larger. And eventually, one person could stand in front of thousands of other humans and say, "You will obey me." And somehow, they did. That is the strange part. A king isn't physically different from anyone else. He has the same bones, the same stomach, the same embarrassing need to use the bathroom. Yet ancient humans built enormous monuments for these people, paid them taxes, fought their wars, and sometimes believed they had been chosen by the gods. So how did we get here? How did humans go from relatively egalitarian bands to societies where one person could sit on a throne and command an entire kingdom? The answer begins with something surprisingly simple: the ability to walk away. Before kings, people could leave. Picture a small hunter-gatherer community, maybe a few dozen people. There is no warehouse, no permanent house, no giant field of wheat, no government office. If someone becomes unbearable, the group has a powerful option. They can leave, and that makes domination difficult. Many hunter-gatherer societies studied by anthropologists have strong mechanisms for preventing individuals from becoming too dominant. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm described this pattern as reverse dominance, where the group collectively keeps ambitious individuals under control. A person who constantly orders everyone around can be mocked. A bully can lose social support. Someone who becomes too dangerous can be excluded. And if things get really bad, people can simply go somewhere else. Think about how powerful that is. If your leader says, "You must do this," you can effectively respond, "No," and disappear. The leader has no office, no tax system, no prison, no permanent army. His authority depends largely on other people choosing to follow him. There could absolutely be influential people, a brilliant hunter, a respected elder, a successful warrior. But influence isn't the same as kingship. A leader who needs everyone to voluntarily follow him is not yet a king. He's more like the guy everyone agrees is useful. And then agriculture changed the equation. Then humans invented the pile of food. Agriculture gave humans something they had never possessed on this scale before: a surplus. Wheat and barley could be harvested, dried, stored, measured, and distributed months later. And that created an extremely important object: pile of grain. Once food can sit in one place, someone has to control that place. Someone has to count the grain. Someone has to protect it. Someone has to decide who receives it. Someone has to record who owes what. And suddenly, information becomes power. Imagine an early settlement in Mesopotamia. Thousands of people may depend on irrigation canals. Farmers produce grain. Workers repair walls. Animals need feeding. Temples need supplies. People need rations. And somebody has to keep track of the whole mess. This is where the earliest writing becomes fascinating. The first writing in Mesopotamia wasn't primarily poetry. It was administration, lists, quantities, workers, animals, goods, rations. Basically, humanity invented writing because somebody desperately needed to know where all the stuff went. Not exactly the glamorous beginning of civilization, but incredibly important, because now a person who controls the records can understand the entire economic system. And if you control the food, and the information about the food, you have something much more powerful than a bag of grain. You have leverage. The granary becomes a political machine. Now imagine you are the person managing that food system, At first, people cooperate because you're useful. You organize storage. You coordinate workers. You distribute rations. Then you hire guards to protect the grain. You reward those guards with grain. Now the guards depend on the system. You appoint officials. The officials depend on their positions. Farmers depend on the irrigation network. Workers depend on rations. And suddenly, nobody has to wake up one morning and announce, "Let's invent a monarchy." The hierarchy can grow naturally, piece by piece. Food creates administration. Administration creates officials. Officials require protection. Protection creates organized force. Organized force creates political power. And eventually somebody asks, why should this particular person be in charge? There are several possible answers. Because he's strong. Because he's wealthy. Because his family has always ruled. Or because the gods chose him. And that last explanation turns out to be extremely powerful. From big man to king. In ancient Mesopotamia, political authority gradually became concentrated in rulers associated with cities, temples, warfare, and administration. One important Sumerian title was lugal, commonly translated as king, and associated with the idea of a powerful or big man. But eventually, rulers became much more than local leaders. Around the 24th century BCE, Sargon of Akkad conquered much of Mesopotamia and built what is widely regarded as the world's first empire. And that changed the scale of the problem. A village leader can personally know the people around him. An emperor can't. Sargon needed administrators, governors, soldiers, scribes, messengers, tax collectors. He needed a political machine capable of operating across enormous distances. And sitting at the center of that machine was the king. But now comes a serious problem. If thousands of people are supposed to obey one man, why him? Being powerful isn't enough. Power can disappear. So rulers needed something stronger. They needed legitimacy. The king becomes sacred. Imagine telling thousands of people, "I have more soldiers than you." That's convincing, but expensive. Now imagine telling them, "The gods gave me the right to rule." That's different, because disobeying the king can now become more than a political decision. It can become a violation of the natural or sacred order. This idea appeared in different forms across ancient civilizations. In Egypt, kingship became deeply connected with divine order. The pharaoh was associated with Horus and had a central role in maintaining Ma'at, the proper order of the world. The message wasn't simply, "I'm stronger than you." It was, "My rule keeps the universe in order." That's a much bigger claim. China developed another fascinating version. The mandate of heaven held that heaven granted legitimacy to rulers, but that legitimacy could be lost. A terrible ruler could lose heaven's support. This created a powerful political idea. The ruler wasn't necessarily legitimate because he was personally perfect. He was legitimate because cosmic authority supposedly supported his rule. And if disaster and disorder became overwhelming, perhaps heaven had chosen someone else. Different civilizations developed different explanations, but they were solving the same problem. How do you convince enormous numbers of people that one person's authority is legitimate? And this is where the psychology of royalty becomes really interesting. The crown is a technology. Stop thinking of a crown as decoration. Think of it as technology. A crown makes someone visually different. A throne puts them physically above everyone else. Ceremonial clothing separates them from ordinary people. Palaces make them difficult to approach. Guards surround them. Rituals announce their arrival. People bow. People kneel. Music plays. And suddenly, your brain receives a very simple message. This person is important. Humans are extremely sensitive to status signals. We look at clothing, posture, crowds, wealth, symbols, the reactions of other people. And we use all of these clues to figure out who has power. A king's environment becomes a giant machine for producing those signals. The guard bows because the king is important. The priest honors the king because the king is important. The crowd watches the priest honor the king. Now the crowd thinks, apparently this guy is really important. Everyone reinforces everyone else. Authority becomes a social snowball. At first, perhaps someone has power. Eventually, everyone behaves as though that power has always been natural. And that's one of the strangest things humans ever invented. We didn't just create rulers. We created symbols that made rulers feel inevitable. But belief wasn't enough. Of course, you still need force. A king who has no soldiers is mostly making suggestions. Organized force changes that. Guards protect the palace. Soldiers suppress rebellions. Armies conquer territory. Officials collect taxes. And the entire system feeds itself. More territory means more resources. More resources support more soldiers. More soldiers protect more territory. And the king sits at the center. But there's another problem. Eventually, the king dies. How a kingdom survives a dead king. Imagine spending 40 years building an enormous political system. Then you die. What happens? The officials don't want their jobs to disappear. The soldiers still want food and pay. The priests still want their institutions. The royal family wants its wealth. Everyone who benefited from the system has a reason to keep it alive. So the simplest solution is, the king's son becomes king, and then his son, and then his son. Now authority isn't simply something you acquire. It's something you inherit. This is a gigantic psychological shift. People stop asking, why is this man ruling? And start asking, who was his father? The bloodline becomes the explanation. Royal families can now present themselves as naturally suited to rule. Not because the newborn prince has demonstrated exceptional leadership. He hasn't even learned to walk. But because his family has supposedly been chosen by history, tradition, or the gods. And once people accept that idea, the system becomes incredibly durable. The strange thing is that this happened again and again. Kingship wasn't invented once and copied everywhere. Different civilizations developed their own forms of centralized and hereditary leadership. Egypt had divine kingship. Mesopotamia developed city-state kingship and eventually empire. China developed dynasties and the mandate of heaven. Across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas, societies developed hereditary rulers, sacred chiefs, warrior kings, and other forms of centralized authority. The details varied enormously, but certain conditions kept appearing. And this gives us a useful way to understand the entire phenomenon. The 3 ingredients. The first ingredient was storable surplus. If wealth can be stored, counted, protected, taxed, and redistributed, someone can control it. Grain was particularly useful. A harvest could feed people months later. And if the food is sitting inside a building, you can put a door on that building. The second ingredient was organized force. A ruler needs people willing to enforce decisions. Guards, warriors, soldiers, officials backed by soldiers. The exact structure changes. The principle remains. Power becomes much stronger when the ruler controls organized violence. And the third ingredient was legitimacy. This might be the most important one, because a ruler can't personally threaten everyone. A king needs millions of tiny acts of cooperation. A farmer pays a tax. A soldier follows an order. A scribe records a shipment. A priest performs a ceremony. A judge enforces the law. A parent teaches a child that the royal family is legitimate. Each action is tiny. Together they create a kingdom, the real invention. So perhaps humans didn't really invent the king. We invented something deeper. We invented the ability to make an invisible idea feel physically real. A crown is just metal, but it represents authority. A throne is just a chair, but it represents status. A palace is just stone, but it represents power. A royal bloodline is just biology, but humans can turn it into a political institution. And once everyone agrees that these symbols mean something, they become incredibly powerful. That's why a king could command people he had never met. He didn't personally control every farmer. He didn't personally guard every granary. He didn't personally enforce every law. The system did it for him. And that system existed because millions of people participated in the same shared belief. Think about how strange that is. For most of human history, your political world was basically the people you could see. Then humans created societies so large that you could obey someone whose face you had never seen. And eventually, you could fight for someone who lived hundreds of kilometers away. You could pay taxes to a palace you'd never visit. You could believe in a royal family whose ancestors had been dead for centuries. That is the real revolution. Not the crown. Not the throne. Not even the army. The revolution was turning human cooperation into something larger than any individual human. And once we learned how to do that, the king became possible. Because the king was never really just one person. He was an idea wearing a human body. And perhaps that is why the oldest crowns still feel strangely powerful today. We know they're objects. We know kings are just people. We know a throne is just a chair. But put the crown on the chair, surround it with symbols, fill the room with ritual, and watch what happens. For a moment, an ordinary human being can look like something more. And that may be humanity's strangest political invention of all. Not creating a man who was born to rule, but creating a world where everyone else could be convinced that he was.